Hey everyone, and welcome to another Planet Coaster 2 video. Today we're going to talk about the new time, or the way time is considered in this game, and I feel like this is a topic that hasn't been talked enough about, and I wanted to dedicate one video to it because I'm hoping that this will be the subject of the next deep dive, but more about the next deep dive later in today's video. First of all, let me give you a bit of context. Planet Coaster 1 was just as Planet Zoo based on a time system that went through the days as the day continued. So one day in the game equaled approximately a month in the game. So that way you didn't really have a change between morning, midday and evening. When it comes to the game's mechanic, it was more like a cosmetic thing, but it didn't really change too much about your game. And since you are already going through one entire month, seasons and weather in Planet Zoo, so to say, didn't really have that much of an impact to the game. However, in Planet Coaster 2, we know already that there is going to be a full day simulated to play with. And we do know this, first of all, because we've seen this all in our demos and how slowly the time passed by, but also with the new weather panel, you can see that you even get a forecast for the entire day and for the next 2 or 3 days. That's it. So the time has become a lot more relevant to the season and the month you're actually in, which then again leads to a lot of changes that I'm going to talk about now. So the point is, if you simulate a game with a monthly based day rhythm, so to say, you have approximately 12 to 14 days, depending on how exactly you do this, to go through a full year, which means that you can also continue a lot better with growing, for example, animals. So for the likes of Planet Zoo, the old system, I want to say, makes a whole bunch of sense if you really think about it, because otherwise have a day simulation would lead to eventually waiting an eternity to have babies or so. In a coaster game, that is not really as relevant, is it? So this is simply something that you need to consider as a completely new approach to the game, because we are not simulating a season or a full year in mind. That's not our core feature. Our core feature is now the simulation of one day. So it is a big difference if you go through a year or through a day, because that will enable you to focus on different management elements such as guest flow and ride mechanics and opening hours and maybe even post and pre-opening hours. Now, I don't really know exactly what they're going to do, but I want to talk about a couple of things now that could be realistically part of this new time base they are going to. I'm not going to talk about the old one that much more because, well, it's not there anymore, and I really did have my doubts about the old one anyway. So let's focus on the new one, and I'm going to lay out a couple of things now that I think would be really cool and would make this whole game benefit a lot from this new system. Before we actually start with this, little disclaimer, in the playtest we did, most of us, if not all of us, played only until the bronze level of this very specific scenario we were in, and we couldn't really see that much of a change because we were only playing like a couple hours of that first day, and there was no real effect on that. So I have no idea what is already in-game from the things we're going to talk about or not, other than the fact that this is just a day simulation and you had a guest flow coming in the morning of the day. But since I didn't even get to the second day, I don't even know if guests would be leaving in the evening. And this is exactly the first point I want to talk about. Opening hours and guests leaving and coming back to your zoo. Now, in the old games, you always had a continuous exchange of people. You know, people left the park and joined the park, and you didn't really caught that because they have been spending a whole bunch of time in your park anyways. But now with this new time-based system, it would be possible to have people be in your park at least for 1 or maybe 2 days. I don't know how exactly would do that, but at least that you have, at the end of the day, people would leave your park. Because this way you could even have a lot more earnings if there is a park only having the entrance fee, for example, and you're not allowed to charge anything else within the park, which is very common for theme parks. That would make a whole bunch of sense to still give you a bit more control over that. Also, changing opening hours in winter and summer makes a whole bunch of sense, because in summer you have a lot more daytime, at least here in our temperate area. There is a lot more sunlight during the whole summer, while in winter there's a lot less. And paying more attention to dark rides or, kind of spooky sections or darker sections in a winter theme would be a lot more beneficial because it's all dark and, you have all that stuff sense. While in the summer, you could have more focus on pools and stuff like that, because obviously in the winter time, and that will be something I'm going to talk about next, obviously slow snow or cold will play a role. However, just to finish up this point with the timing of opening hours, you could also play around with that. Like making shorter opening hours would obviously give you the chance of having more people come in for a little or less time that they're in your park, so getting a bit more money maybe eventually. And also, if there could be a system of providing more potential space in your park, making that park bigger, you can have more guests getting into your park. I briefly saw the menu. I wasn't allowed to show that, but I briefly saw the menu that you can see how much the guests were limited, and that in that scenario the guests were limited, if I remember correctly, to 4,000, which is not that high, to be honest, because on Gamescom the park had already way over 8,000 or even 8,500 guests in there. So maybe this is even like a vehicle to control how many guests you have, and since 4,000 isn't that much, but if you purchase more land, for example, that limit would be pushed to 6, 8, you name it, you know. And that's a lot different now. Obviously you could do that with the old system too, but it would make a whole bunch more sense if it would be, you know, multiplied by the fact that each and every day you can charge that much more money, and that would be a very interesting factor. Now, talking about weather, this can finally play a much bigger role, because in Planet Zoo, weather was a weird one. Weather was obviously cosmetically the most beautiful weather I've seen in a game, period. So, you know, if you don't take into consideration some high-class first-person shooters or something that obviously have great weather but then really programmed in, for a game like that, for like a management game with like dynamic weather, oh my god, was that a great integration. But it did have little to no influence on the game. I mean, yes, you needed some heaters and shelters for rain and coldness and stuff, but it didn't really affect the whole flow of your park. As soon as you have spammed enough heaters, well, your park was good to go, and as soon as you had enough shelters, well, you were good to go. While if you have a more dynamic approach on seasons and weather, because you have the days, you know that in the summer you have a lot more hotter days, which would lead to a lot more management aspects focused on the pools and sunscreen and shade, while in winter you could make more money with selling umbrellas, for example, or even, and this is a point I'm going to talk about a little later in this video because it's a very more important one, even more beanies or jackets, but more about that later, because I want to focus this one a bit more about the specifics of the seasons and weather. So imagine having snowy weather in the winter times, which would cause a lot of issues for your coasters, for example, because some of them may not be operational. But then you could have, and this would be something for later DLCs, I imagine, you could go into completely different aspects of theme parks that Planet Coaster 1 completely neglected on. And that is something like having like party areas or business areas, you know, where you can do some winter dreams and then just like have like parades and shows in your winter area to basically compensate for the rides that you can't open, you know. This is very typical for theme parks. Phantasialand here in Germany, for example, has something very beautiful, and for those of you who can go, I highly recommend. They have the so-called Winterzauber, which is kind of the magical winter world, and everything is like styled around that. You have like entertainers roaming around doing that. They have like hot chocolates in different variants, and some rides are changed and like really nice. And this is obviously for them to still draw people into the park even in the winter times and make the most of it. And you know, having this change with weather and season for a full day, that would change so much, because now you can really nicely transition into the winter time, and you would have time, and this will be the most you know, inflational used word in this in this video, but obviously you would have time to prepare for that season. So let's say you go into October, okay, which is autumn transition into winter, then you have a full like 30 days in-game time to prepare for that next season. And honestly, for like a system like a coaster game, it doesn't really matter that much that you are like in year 345 at the end of your playthrough. It would be totally fine to be in year 30 if you have kind of done the same, but the game would have offered you such a better experience. I really do think that this, especially with the seasons and weather, would offer so much more. But now let's talk about that little thing I was teasing, because because there is more to that. It's not only an influence on your parks and ride, it would also be an influence on your guest. Now, let's say different seasons have obviously different attitudes coming from your guests. So you could also have the same park with the same target groups, but according to the season and according to what time we are in, they have different desires. You're not going to have the same desire in the winter times as you have in the summer times. Let's say you want to go on the river rapids. In the summer, that is a absolutely beloved ride because everyone wants to get soaked and then go into, and this is another hint that I think I got, and there is a human dryer in the game, which you could argue is now for the pools, but wouldn't they have towels or so? Very commonly, human dryers are used after water rides, especially for the, I want to say the changing seasons, like spring and autumn, because otherwise people would get sick and then they don't go onto the rides. Would you go onto a water flume or log flume if it's like only 14, 15 degrees outside-ish? You wouldn't do that if you get soaked, but if you know that there are human dryers out there, just like in Phantasialand, for example, you could consider doing it anyways and then dry yourself afterwards nicely. And this is, as this is already in-game, this little wonderful piece, could be an element that is controlled by the new time and the new weather. Because again, it only makes sense if you have a valuable amount of time that makes benefit or takes benefit of this system. If you quickly compare to the old system, having this dryer would actually only kind of be for one in-game day, if you will, because that would be the whole of October, and then it's already November and it's going to be too cold. So there will be no reason to have like a human dryer for only 2 days of your full experience compared to like the whole experience. But now, as you have the whole of October, which would equal to like 15 or 30 days even. Again, I'm not entirely sure if they go for 1 day or if you skip, let's say 3 days, so that the whole October hasn't got 30 days, but like 10, and then each day equals to 3 days, something like that. Would make sense, because otherwise having full 360 of 65 days would be a little bit weird. So I'm guessing that they are doing something like that to compensate for that. But then you still have a full month to play with this changing season, and I would really love to see that. And, well, last but not least, can we finally see people wear different clothing? Can we finally see guests having jackets and beanies and long trousers and stuff like that when it's cold, and not like the absurd, ridiculous behavior in Planet Zoo that in December they join your park in complete summer clothing, like shorts and shirt, and then they're like shivering the whole time, like there's literal shiver animation in the game, while they could just wear other stuff, I guess. But then you have to put down heaters to make them tropical climate in the taiga biome because they're too stupid to wear an actual beanie, jacket, and a scarf. Considering our people in this game, in Planet Coaster 2, are a lot more detailed, and we're talking about things like piercings, earrings, bracelets, and stuff like that, this could be a little hint that we can finally see some scarves and gloves and stuff like that to compensate for colder weather, finally. The same, by the way, goes for, like, I mean, that's a wet dream, sorry, pun intended, because, like, you could also have these raincoats for, like, very humid areas, but that's a step too far. I know, I heard you, it's too far. But what is not too far is obviously the core part of this video, and everything I talked about is very nice and decent and would be lovely, and I'm guessing a lot of this may actually make its way in, but this, we are going to talk about this now, because that is the management of the day, like the full day. And there is a insanely clear hint to that, and this is the staff management schedule we've already seen and also quickly talked upon in my analysis video of the playtest. I didn't really play around with this as much as I could have, because I just briefly saw that, but the fact we have it in means that there is a need to shift your people across your day. And the only reason why you would need to do that is because the day will come with different challenges. And Again, as I said, if you have the full like 1.5 hours or maybe 2 hours actual real time equaling a day, you could actually do a really nice management with this. You can have a higher load in the midday hours where you need to have more staff in a certain very popular area, for example. It's not like that you have the very same amount of vendors, for example, at the whole day everywhere. No, it would potentially be enough to have like double the amount of staff members in the midday hours in your ice cream shops, let's say, while in the afternoon or evening you don't need that. Equally, in the summer days you may not need that much staff in your more indoor areas or whatnot, while in the winter times you would need a lot less people in the pool area. So then you need to like change these plans actively, which is super nice for a management aspect. That would bring in so much more longevity to the game, but also so much more flexibility that you can also, and you know, we all are still dreaming of actual transfer tracks, or if not transfer tracks, at least the ability to add a coaster train to your coaster when you have the chance to. And let me quickly explain that, because not everyone is aware of how a coaster operates. Some people are fine with building theme parks and just click and go, but I think it's so valid and so necessary to talk about because it's so important. What a transfer track does is it gives you the ability to add a train to your operation while the coaster is still opened. Now, we always were able to have another train on the coaster if we closed the coaster in Planet Coaster 1, added another block section, and then in the menu added another train, but then we had to test it again and reopen it. In real life, that's a bit different. If you have enough block sections for your coaster, and that's the one thing you need to make sure, you need to have enough block sections to have a maximum of, let's say, for our example, 5 trains. And normally, for the average load that you have and the average capacity, you only need to have 3 trains running, which is for cost reasons and for maintenance reasons. You would only do that. Why would you have running more trains if you don't need to? Also, psychologically, it's nicer to have a full train, but that's a different story. And then if you would add that train or have these 3 trains added, everything is fine. But as more people get into your park and get to that coaster and the queue is filling in, people get upset because the waiting times are too long, you will eventually add in the 4th train and the 5th train until you have all the trains running. And that also requires more maintenance, obviously, and more staff members allocated to your area because there's a higher likeliness of a breakdown or a problem or whatnot. And honestly, this would be the bestest of all changes, and that is not only true to coasters, but just in general the same element would also be held true to all the other rides. Like having a bit more staff allocated to a certain area could, you know, equal to a bit of a better push through of guests, for example, better management, or you send some entertainers in an area where there's a lot of flat rides having a long queue at this point in time, and so on and so on. You can already imagine how much this is. And just to reinforce why that wasn't possible in the first game is because it wasn't daytime based, but actually month time based. Like, sure, you had a daytime, but the daytime wasn't equaling to actually what was going on in your park. So and because it was pathing so quickly, even just in play, if you had a play mode, I think an hour was pathing in a minute or so. So it's not valuable enough. It's not as much of a time that you can make use of. I am really hyped about this change because there has to be a reason why they didn't really talk about all of that quite yet. There has to be a reason why we were only allowed to play this first scenario and not more, and why they asked us to finish after bronze and go over to Sandbox, even for those who wanted to continue with scenario. There has to be a reason why they were completely silent about anything related to the management so far, and they didn't even talk about the fact that the time has changed. Like, we have seen that. It's confirmed by us seeing it. But Frontier literally hasn't actively confirmed it in a way. I was even trying to speak to Adam about this at Gamescom, but he was literally really nicely dodging these questions. So I am very hyped for that, even though I know that I won't be playing the management mode so much. But I know how many players want to have more like the old games, and a lot of this held true to Roller Coaster Tycoon on a very basic note already. So if you, for example, had Rain, Obviously, popular coasters weren't as popular anymore, and indoor rides became a lot more popular, while in other sections, you know, other stuff happens, and the different maps had different weather, and so different rides, and you needed to build different rides to make more money. And it was great, and it was simple to understand, and now really hoping that this translates into this game. Hopefully you guys found this, my very personal deep dive interesting, and it could have given you some ideas. And now it's your turn, because I only could have touched upon a couple of things. I didn't want to do too many. Now it's your time. What do you think this new system will enable us to do? I'm sure you will come up with the craziest and coolest ideas, and we can then see how much of this hopefully Frontier has done. And yeah, hopefully Frontier is going to do this coming Wednesday. And I'm gonna stream this live again, my live reaction, so if you fancy joining, that would be lovely. So until then, have a nice time, don't forget to subscribe, and have a good time.